Hey, good morning, everyone. Josh of Severe Weather. Happy Tuesday to you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am a meteorologist in the Raleigh area, and I'm going to spend about the next 25 minutes chatting with you guys about the tropics and what we are looking at kind of more in the longer term, the next few weeks. And that does look like things are going to start ramping up here in the Atlantic after what's been a pretty quiet 6 week period or so. Now, typically this time of year, we don't see a lot of action in the tropics. There was kind of an unprecedented burst in June and things quieted down as you would expect in El Nino. But now the waters are even warmer and we are heading into a stretch of weather that's looking like it's going to be more active for storm formation, possibly even hyperactive. But we'll talk about some of the pros to that, some of the cons to that may be happening. I'll also chat later in this video about some severe weather we're expecting in the Eastern U.S. today and then into the upper Midwest for tomorrow. But mostly we're talking about tropics here. So let me share my screen with you all. And we are taking a look at, this is kind of a model graphic here that shows next week what could start the beginning of a very active Cape Verde season and also potentially some threats in the Gulf of Mexico and the Eastern Pacific. Now, this is just a forecast model. Things are going to likely change, but just want to kind of illustrate for you the areas that some of the models are developing here, probably in the next 2 weeks or so. Now, forecasts 2 weeks out obviously are not super reliable, but we are going to watch multiple waves coming off of Africa, heading towards the islands and into the western and east, or the central and eastern Atlantic. And then maybe something to keep an eye on that could develop in the Gulf next week. So something to watch in Texas, which could end up being beneficial depending on if it gets strong or not, because we do need some rainfall here. And then in the Pacific, we're still looking at some very busy weather over the next couple of days. So here is a look at the Atlantic Basin, and you can see if something gets into the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico, there is a ton of ocean heat content. It's not going to take a lot. Once we get favorable low wind shear, where we could see a storm development happen very quickly. In fact, maybe some rapid intensification, but we need to get some other ingredients in place for that. But basically off the charts here from the Central Gulf on over to the Bahamas and into the Northwestern and North Central Caribbean, just quite a bit of oceanic heat content, more than you would expect, even in a busy season. Now, some things that are keeping waves from Africa from developing, the main thing is that we've got a lot of dry air. This is Saharan air layer of dust coming off of the Sahara in northern Africa. I'm going to learn to speak, I promise. And you can see there's a ton of dust here over the central and eastern parts of the Atlantic, and that is for the time being holding things at bay. But as we get later into this week and over the weekend, there are projections that that amount of dust is going to move westward and weaken and eventually disperse or dissipate. So by the time we get into next week, conditions do look like they're going to be more favorable. We also have quite a bit of wind shear over the Caribbean. See this area of red? That is unfavorable wind shear from the west to east. And that is going to take thunderstorms that develop and move into this area and blow the tops off of them. So wind shear very unfavorable here across the southern and central Caribbean and over into the central Atlantic. There is a pocket, though, where development would be more favorable here, but that's northeast of the islands, kind of in no man's land. And if you look at the Gulf of Mexico and the northwestern Caribbean, while we don't have any threats right now, we do have favorable low wind shear. So something that does try to get into this area towards next week is going to have a better chance at developing. And that is assuming something does eventually get into there. So we're going to keep an eye on that. But right now, even though we do have favorable low wind shear, we've got very dry air in place over the Gulf of Mexico, kind of a ridge of high pressure in place. Let me actually get my cursor out to show you guys here. And you can see the areas of favorable wind shear. We do have just a big area of high pressure that's just sitting in place here over the southern states and that's keeping everything off to the south and allowing it to develop here in the Mexico and Eastern Pacific portion of the tropics. We do have a large upper level low here that is moving west. That's creating strong wind shear in this direction, keeping out any kind of development. We also have an upper level low underneath this high pressure system right here. And that is allowing storms to flare up over Central America. But of course, we have land, so it's going to be very difficult to get things to tropically develop. So right now, conditions do not favor any kind of development in the Western Atlantic, in the Gulf, or in the Caribbean. Where they do favor development is going to be on the Pacific side of things. Now, what I'm going to show you is that things are likely to start changing here, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Here's our upper level low moving westward. Keep an eye on it as it heads towards the Gulf of Mexico next week. as the wind shear is lower there and the high pressure ridge is actually going to move northward and allow some moisture to come in underneath. You can start to see there's kind of a gyre forming over Central America, but this is moving west, so it's not going to develop on the Atlantic side of things. But Central America is going to be super wet here with this gyre and this upper level low. This upper level low here, and let me get my pen out for you guys again. This one right here, it's missing thunderstorms, but as it moves in this direction into the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to be in a spot where things could be more favorable for gradual development here later on next week. So that's what I'm going to keep an eye on for you guys here, and maybe a threat to Texas or northeastern Mexico. Now, in the rest of the Atlantic, you can see tons of dry air. That's this area black here. That is Saharan dust. But below it, we do have some blow-ups of thunderstorms here over the central Atlantic and the eastern Atlantic that we're going to have to keep an eye on. And here's a look farther east where you can kind of see that water vapor image. Let me change that for you guys so you can see here. There we go. So you can see we definitely have some waves coming off of Africa that are looking more impressive, but they're hitting that dry air in the eastern Atlantic. So for the time being, development right now from the Cape Verdes is going to take some time. However, towards next week, if forecasts hold, we will likely be looking at some tropical development, maybe a couple of storms coming here. And you can see why. This is the upper level pattern, and the areas of green show where favorable conditions exist for storms to develop. Right now, the favorable conditions are east of the Philippines and over the eastern Pacific. As we get 5 days out, that starts shifting into the Gulf of Mexico and into the Caribbean, and then 10 days out more into the central Atlantic, and it continues to remain favorable right through the beginning of September for development. So you can see things kind of pulse across here over the what's called the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, and we see more favorable phase for development over the eastern Pacific at the end of next week, and then over the Caribbean and western Atlantic the following week. So we do have a window in the next 3 weeks for things to get much busier. Right now, there are two areas that the National Hurricane Center is monitoring for development. The first area has just a 10% chance of developing in the next week. But if it does, it may be a low-end system here approaching the islands in about 8 days. So that would be next Wednesday. The area behind it actually has a better chance of developing, but you can see it's already tracking northwestward and does not appear like it's going to be any kind of threat to land. If it develops sooner, then this is going to recurve and be more of an issue for the eastern Atlantic. This one more for the central Atlantic, but right now nothing to talk about across the western Atlantic or the Caribbean. Now, as we take a look at the European ensemble, and I put this in motion, and I'm going to stop this here. You can see over the next, let's say 5 days, we do have two areas of low pressure to track. One here over the central Atlantic moving west, the other over the eastern Atlantic moving west-northwest. Now, as we get to the end of next weekend, you can see most of our ensembles keep this solution farther south and relatively weak. A lot of 1,000+ millibar tracks here, but this system showing a little bit more intensification and more of a track off to the northwest, which is good for us in the U.S. It means it would not be a threat. As we get to about this time next week, we see that there's kind of a split here where in the central Caribbean or in the eastern Caribbean, we have either dissipation here due to wind shear, or we've got a more organized system going north of the islands. That could be a tropical storm or even a hurricane, according to some of these solutions. The system behind it is likely going to be heading in this direction. Let me actually go back a couple for you here. And you can see the models actually develop a third wave here in between the two here over the weekend that could intensify. Now, we also see development over the Gulf of Mexico. I talked about this in yesterday's video. This would be kind of homegrown action here as we get into early next week. This is Monday. And then Tuesday and Wednesday, we do see some solutions taking this towards Texas, more as a lower end storm, but it could intensify more quickly closer to the coast by next Wednesday. So 1, 2, 3, 4 trackable features here over the next week. And then as we get beyond that, we could see a lower end system heading into Texas, which would be beneficial. We need rain in Texas and Louisiana for sure. We need to break this heat as well. And I do think that's going to happen here as this disturbance comes into Texas, and maybe it's a tropical storm. This area, though, we're going to have to keep an eye on. Right now, the European has some solutions turning it towards Bermuda as a hurricane. The one behind it, also a hurricane, but likely recurving into the central Atlantic. And then this one behind it, tropical storm, maybe hurricane, but over the eastern Atlantic. So right now, no signs of anything long track that's going to be affecting the United States. At least I don't think so. But we are going to have to keep an eye on what does try to get into the Western Atlantic. If it holds together, then obviously in the Southeast and the East Coast, we're going to have something to watch. But most of the action is still well out to sea here, and I do think that generally is the trend as we look at El Nino's seasons here. Now, here's a look at the ensemble chances of a tropical depression forming, and you can see in the next couple of days, there is a fairly decent chance of some development here with this wave, low development here with this wave, and high development here with this wave by Friday. So our next storm may actually be Emily out here over the far eastern Atlantic. This could be Franklin, and then we're going to have to just keep an eye on things a little bit closer to home here next week. You can see the European shows about a 30% chance that a developing depression forms. That one might be Gert or Gerd, I think it is, by next Monday and Tuesday here in the Central Gulf. And that is generally trending west towards Texas, but it could be a lower end feature at this point. I'm not really concerned about anything in the Southern Caribbean. We typically see some trades here and it tries to show a depression, but you can see if we just look at the daily probabilities here, 1 system, 2 systems, 3 system, 4 systems. So a very active stretch of weather. And right now, really the only concern is the one in the Gulf next Tuesday into next Wednesday. Beyond that, there are some solutions here that do say we need to keep an eye on things on the East Coast, but that would not be until the weekend after next. And at that point, the certainty level is very low. Here's a look at the Canadian model, and you can see as we get on into the future here, we do see some gradual development here of 1 and 2, and then maybe number 3 here by the weekend. And notice the third one doesn't really hold together. The Canadian does take this one into the Caribbean and then eventually east of the Bahamas and develops it here later next week. The 2 behind it are developing slowly, but no threat at this point. And you can see maybe a 4th one developing out here. So things are very active on the Canadian model. The GFS is not showing as much development as the Canadian. Typically you see things the other way, but certainly we've got to keep an eye on these 4 systems. And then closer to home with the Canadian, you can see this area of low pressure that could form here near Cuba over the weekend and then track into the West Central Gulf somewhere in this area here next week. So we're keeping an eye on a weak system here moving through Puerto Rico, but something may very quickly pop up under our noses a lot quicker and head towards Texas here towards next Tuesday and Wednesday. So about 7 to 8 days before a potential impact on the U.S. Keep an eye on this one farther out. Right now, models showing it recurving towards Bermuda, but obviously that is 10 days out and things could change. Now on the Pacific side of things, 2 named storms, and then likely a system that could be an issue for the Baja California here next week. This would be Hillary, and then maybe one behind it that could form over the weekend. That would be Irwin. So you can see on the satellite image, things are very busy here on the Pacific side of things. This is Hurricane Fernanda, which I'll show you here in just a little bit. And the European is showing 4 potential systems here, 1, 2, 3, and then here comes number 4 right behind it next week. And if I show you just kind of the daily probabilities here, you can see something to keep an eye on in California, certainly the Baja, and then something to keep an eye on here near the Gulf of Tehuantepec and the Mexican Riviera. So very busy still in the Pacific. You can see with the Canadian, this is Fernanda, this is Hillary. I know I'm already calling it Hillary before it gets there, but it could develop very quickly here next weekend. And then maybe something to keep an eye on in the Baja, maybe even Southern California. Some of that moisture could get up there. And then this looks like it's going to be Irwin behind it here next week. And then possibly things start slowing down in the Pacific as they get busier in the Atlantic. Hurricane Fernanda is weakening. It was a Category 4 storm. Now you can see probably a Category 2 at this point. And then we also have Greg out ahead of it, which is a tropical storm with 50-mile-per-hour winds. And that's going to pass well south of Hawaii here. And then we do still have Dora, which is weakening very quickly. But here's Fernanda. Winds are now 110 miles per hour. So a Category 2 storm. It was once a 4 and likely to weaken to a remnant low over the weekend. But it is tracking towards Hawaii. So keep an eye on things in Hawaii. Greg is looking a little healthier, 50-mile-per-hour winds, but a fish storm that's going to go well south of Hawaii, not going to cause trade wind issues on Maui. Unfortunately, we saw that last week, and likely to be a remnant low here by the end of this week. Here's a look at the GFS model, and you can see this is Greg. Here comes Fernanda, and takes the remains of Fernanda over the big island of Hawaii Sunday night. But at that point, just a remnant low. Greg, of course, is going to die over the central Atlantic. And beyond that, we don't really see anything of immediate concern for Hawaii. I mentioned Hawaii because it's been in the news quite a bit. And then, of course, Japan just got hit by Typhoon Lan. That is now weakened to a tropical storm. That came right between Osaka and Miki here yesterday, and I'm sure we're going to see some damage reports, but fortunately it's down to 60 miles per hour, and the eventual track takes it over the Sea of Japan as a remnant low and then recurving. And of course, recurving storms can impact our weather in the United States. What'll happen with this recurve is that the big trough we see over the Great Lakes is going to get pushed out by this recurving trough that moves into the Pac Northwest. And that's going to lead to a building ridge of high pressure over the central U.S. So we do still have quite a bit of heat coming here into the central plains, into the Midwest here next week. And what that does is the ridge of high pressure that's forced to only affect the southern United States shifts north, and under that ridge, the ridge over troubled waters, is where we start to see an avenue for storms to come into the Gulf of Mexico in about 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks. So we're going to keep an eye on that for you here. Here is land, 50 mile per hour storm, weakening as it moves away from Japan. Now we get to talk about severe weather, and we did see that in Tennessee, western North Carolina last night, the tail end of this strong upper level feature moving through Michigan. That is going to lead to some active weather on the East Coast here today. We do have a slight risk for severe weather across the mid-Atlantic states, marginal risk all the way down to the eastern Gulf states, all the way up to Lake Ontario, and also over to southern New England. That moves away tomorrow. We'll still have some heavier showers and storms over the southeastern U.S. and as well over the southwest. And then our next system drops down from Canada and could affect the upper Midwest here as soon as tomorrow. Here is a look at our severe weather chances, a 15% chance of severe wind from the Triad and Raleigh, North Carolina on up through Southeast Virginia and all the way up into South Jersey, 5% chance into southern New England and western New York and down into the Southeast, a 5% chance for hail from Charlotte and Greensboro on up into the Philly area and back to about Buffalo, and a 2% chance for tornadoes late this afternoon over Northeast North Carolina, Southeastern Virginia, Eastern Maryland, as well as western New York and northwestern PA, and as well as Long Island, upstate New York over to southern New England, a 2% chance for tornadoes. Tomorrow, that moves away, and we have a 15% chance tomorrow evening of severe wind around the Twin Cities, Duluth, and northwestern Wisconsin. We also have a 15% chance for severe hail across this region as well, maybe even into upper Michigan later at night. The HRRR model shows our storm system circulating here over northwestern Ohio this afternoon, storms popping up out ahead of it over western PA and New York, and then additional storm development over the mid-Atlantic region here as we get through this afternoon, carrying into the northeast here tonight. Things will stay active overnight, maybe some heavy storms into tomorrow morning over southeastern New England. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. In the northeast, you can see we do have heavy rain this morning over central and eastern New England. Really no severe weather threat, but that will dissipate this afternoon. And then more rain and storms hit the area tonight across southern New England, as well as across northern parts of New York State and into northwestern Vermont and New Hampshire here tomorrow. Eventually some showers moving into Maine as well, but a quieter day tomorrow. And it is going to cool down quite a bit here. So a nice cooler second half of this week for the Northeast. Here's a closer look at southern New England today. And you can see bands of heavy showers and storms moving through Massachusetts, Rhode Island, eastern Connecticut, Cape Cod, right on through this morning. Then we see a lull in the action here this afternoon. Then more storms moving through Jersey here late this afternoon into the early evening. New York City could have some severe weather around 7, 8 o'clock. Long Island, heavy rain. This will all move across the Sound and affect southern New England later on this evening and overnight tonight. And then quieter weather as this rain will exit the area during the morning tomorrow. As we look farther to the west across New York State and Pennsylvania, oops, what happened to my cursor? There we go. We do see a few heavier showers and storms over western and central PA later this morning into the early afternoon, but more storms forming this afternoon over eastern PA between 4 and 6 o'clock. Around the Philly area, we could see severe hail, maybe an isolated tornado and some strong winds, and then things will quiet down here later on towards the evening hours. Tomorrow should be a lot quieter day, just a few specks over the Poconos, but really it'll be cooler and less humid at that point, so things do turn quieter. Now looking farther south across Maryland and Delaware, we do see another active afternoon across the same areas that got hit hard yesterday. So right around DC and Fairfax County, right up to Baltimore into northeastern Maryland. It's going to be a very rough evening commute for many of you here across this region before things leave the area. And then things will quiet down here, just a few lingering showers over eastern Maryland overnight tonight, and then much better weather tomorrow into Thursday. So we will see a lot quieter stretch of weather coming as that drier, cooler air moves in. Now, things were a little bit nasty in the Carolinas here yesterday. We had heavy rain in western North Carolina overnight. More storms are likely to fire up in some of the same places that fired up yesterday. So right across the foothills region, upstate South Carolina, and the Triad around mid-afternoon, and then an active afternoon expected from the I-85 corridor on eastward. That includes Greensboro, High Point, Salisbury, Charlotte, Waxhaw, and Monroe here through the afternoon, then spreading across the Triangle. Multiple showers and storms with heavy rain expected in the Triangle between about 4 and 8 o'clock tonight. And then over eastern North Carolina and eastern Virginia this evening. Fayetteville, more heavy showers and storms expected right on up to Suffolk, the Great Dismal Swamp, and the Virginia Tidewater here early this evening. Things will gradually quiet down, but still some heavier rain overnight possible south of Raleigh, including the Sandhills region, the PD region, and even the Fayetteville area. And then things should quiet down overall for the area tomorrow, but there'll still be some showers and storms over eastern North Carolina, and some of these could produce some heavy rainfall, but quieter, more comfortable weather moves into places like Charlotte and Raleigh. I'm not sure if I buy into this stray shower chance here tomorrow night. Finally, let's look real quick at the southeastern region, and we do see some active weather expected here with all the hot, humid weather we've had over Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. It'll get active along I-85 and I-65 here this afternoon, 3 to 4 in the afternoon, continuing to spread eastward across the Piedmont region towards evening and into the coastal plain and southern Georgia here as we get into the late evening hours and overnight. That's when our wettest weather is expected. Things will quiet down overall by tomorrow morning, but still a few showers and storms will be possible in the low country as well as across southern and central parts of Georgia tomorrow afternoon as our front slowly dangles its way southward here into southeastern Georgia. So it'll still be pretty active in the low country tomorrow, late in the afternoon into the evening. Could be some toad stranglers here on 95 tomorrow around 7, 8 o'clock from Jacksonville right on up into, say, places like Walterboro, South Carolina. And then those are expected to push offshore tomorrow evening. Finally, let's take a look at the next system real quick for those of you in the Great White North. Pretty good weather for today, but our next front is going to move into the area later in the day tomorrow, and showers and storms will move across the Superior region around 8, 9 o'clock tomorrow night. And while the HRRR model doesn't really show anything, some of the other models are hinting that some of this action could continue farther south and west along this boundary to the Twin Cities. A lot of that's going to be late in the evening and overnight. So I really appreciate y'all's time. I could go on, but I don't have all day, and I know you don't either. But thank you so much for your time today. I hope you all have a blessed day. And if you did enjoy this video, please consider inviting your friends to subscribe. I do have a membership channel. It's $9.99 a month. Those of you that are really adverse to weather certainly would want to consider joining that, as I can give you more in-depth looks at weather and answer your questions faster that way. Pretty busy guy. I'm actually going to be on the road early in the day tomorrow into Thursday, so I'm not going to be able to do a video for you. Any major weather, once I get some time, I can post to the community page. I'll get back late Thursday night. Friday morning, I may not be able to do a video unless I feel like I'm rested, but chances are that's a very low chance. So we may not have a video again till the weekend. But in the tropics, I don't think we'll have any named storms between now and Friday. And once we get this severe weather to move away from the southeast here tomorrow, we should be quieter for a few days. So I'm not going to miss too much, to be honest with you. But as we get towards this weekend, I will have another full video for you guys talking about the tropics and what has changed from now to then. I do expect we'll be talking about some red areas of potential development by the weekend here, and certainly a busier week next week. But again, it's a forecast in the tropics. Anything beyond 4 or 5 days is kind of a low skill forecast at this point, in my opinion. So I really appreciate y'all's time today, and I need to get some more coffee in me, starting to stumble over a few words, just to be honest. It's early in the day for me. I've been working nonstop, and my family's got a lot going on. So I just want to thank God for giving me enough strength and courage to get out and do this video today. It was very easy for me to just go back to bed and sleep in. I know a lot of you guys know how that feels, but just know that I can't do it without God. He is my source of strength. He is my refuge, my strength, and he allows me to do this. He's called me to be a meteorologist and also called me to share the good word with you as a Christian man. And real quick, I did want to encourage you with a verse that I really appreciate, Romans 8:28, King James Version. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. I really hope you all have a purpose in life, whether or not you believe in God or in Jesus Christ as our Savior. I hope you that you really do in your life what you believe you are called to do. Whether or not you feel like God has called you, I just pray that you are doing something and you're reaping the benefits of all the hard work you've put in. And if you're older and in a spot where you feel like it's time to just pretty much pack it in and let the grandkids run around and watch them and enjoy it, I want to pray for you especially because I have a lot of older relatives right now, and we've seen health challenges with them, and we know that they want to enjoy time with their grandkids, but at the same time they're in chronic pain. They're to the point in life where things are just frustrating, political strife, more divide, religious divide, political divide, just a lot of things, inflation, trying to even being able to outlive their savings, if that matters. And I just want to pray, especially for older folks out there, because you guys are always on my hearts and on my mind. I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for my parents and grandparents. Although many of them are not believers, I feel that they have still put me in the spot that I'm in so that I can change things and I can be a chain breaker and then I can raise up my kids and my grandkids. So anyway, I would love to pray for you, whatever your situation is. I'm going to be on the road tomorrow. I'm going to have a lot of time with God, and just know that you all are on my minds, whether or not you're believers, and I want to pray for you. So please pray for my travel mercies and my health, and I will catch you all again here towards the end of the week or the weekend. Have a wonderful, blessed day. See you then.